turned out. And one group is taking it even further, putting up billboards across Israel's main highway, slamming the ceasefire deal that ended the Gaza conflict. Now, of course, the deal written on those billboards: do you support the ceasefire deal that ended the conflict? With me is the man who helped, one of the people who put up those billboards, Greg Roman, director of Middle East Forum. And Greg, tell us about this billboard campaign that the Middle East Forum has been involved in.
Sure. So this is actually our third campaign in the last 3 years. We've had the opportunity to speak about the conflict a few times, but this is the first time that we had a policy result, which I think the Israeli public, 73% of whom did not agree with, are demanding more results out of the recent conflict with Hamas. The billboard says, "Am doresh nitzachon," the people demand victory. The general idea is not wars ending when one side declares victory, but when one side recognizes defeat. And Hamas celebrating on the streets of Gaza City is not indicative of them feeling what actually happened after the latest round of conflict.
Right. Now, as we reported just yesterday, polling that was done right after the conflict showed that 47% of the Israel public was unhappy with the ceasefire agreement with Hamas that ended the fighting. Among the dissatisfaction was the fact that there wasn't a decisive victory over Hamas. That's one of the things that your group has put up, and the thing the nation's demands a victory. Define what you would see as a decisive victory over Hamas.
So I think there's three ideas that we try to imbue the government to adopt. The first is the complete disarmament of Hamas in Gaza and also anywhere else where they may have strategic stores of weaponry, which include the Egyptian desert, the Qatari financing for some of that, and even the rat line that goes from Iran through Sudan up into the Sinai Peninsula and then into the Gaza Strip proper. The second is breaking the will of Hamas to fight. And that could be a few things. You could take out Hamas leadership, you can cut off their travel availability, or further sanction them individually in countries like Turkey, Qatar, and Malaysia, which have relations with the United States, but allow them to operate there. And the third thing is making sure that any Israeli bodies of soldiers, like Hadar Golden, which was taken 7 years ago during Operation Protective Edge, and also the two Israelis who are still alive and in the Hamas hands, are returned back without any preconditions. All of this has to happen before any discussions of peace, any discussions of the entrance of necessary humanitarian aid, or rebuilding Gaza takes place. Until that happens, they will continue preparing for a fifth round of conflict in the last 11 years.
Right. Let's talk about that specific issue, because it's a very emotional one, and we've had Leah Golden, the mother of Hadar Golden, one of the soldiers whose remains are still being held in the Gaza Strip, because this is still a live issue, meaning there are other arrangements. Okay, the ceasefire deal was reached, but for example, Israel has to now negotiate and allow for aid, reconstruction aid, humanitarian aid to go into Gaza, and there are demands from the Golden family, the Shaul family, those of the other two Israeli civilians, to make sure that there are conditions placed on that will involve some deal for the hostages and the remains.
Right, and that shouldn't be the precursor to saying, oh, and by the way, Hamas is going to ask for 1,000 Palestinian security prisoners to be included in that deal, like with what happened with Gilad Shalit after Operation Cast Lead. There has to be a definitive Israeli demand that has to be met by Hamas prior to the entrance to any kind of negotiations to get back to the status quo prior to the beginning of that 12-day conflict. And until that happens, Hamas will continue behaving like they do time and time again. They have their infrastructure destroyed. They use international aid money to buttress rebuilding it. All money's fungible at the end of the day. Money for humanitarian aid is money that they're going to be able to rebuild their army afterwards. And until you're able to create a paradigm where it's funds for Israeli demands rather than just funds for building up for the next conflict, you're going to be left with the same exact position where we're at right now.
Right. Now, of course, the Israeli government negotiated this deal indirectly through Egyptian mediators, but the U.S. administration, the Biden administration, also had a role here. Did support Israel and did support it certainly in the first week of the war, but there was increasing pressure on Israel to reach a ceasefire. Talk about how, for example, your organization and the other ones involved in this campaign see the Biden administration's role here.
Sure. So the Biden administration is not Obama and it's not Trump, where those two administrations had policies related towards Israel and the Palestinians, whether you're for or against it. The Biden administration was caught basically with their entire policy chest not developed. You had Hadi Amar, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for State for Israel-Palestine issues, that came out here without an agenda. Tony Blinken was making phone calls from Denmark, and Joe Biden was making jokes about running reporters over with cars after he was confronted by Rashida Tlaib at Detroit International Airport. And those three things together, a lack of policy, a lack of the communications, and a lack of message from when they came out, gave mixed signals to the Israelis. And I think because of that confusion, they were not willing to make a decision which was best for Israel. They were waiting for the U.S. to make a decision for them. And because of that, this campaign that we have together isn't about Joe Biden. It's not about the Palestinians. It's about convincing Israeli authorities and the Israeli military and the government to do what it takes to win their war against Palestinian rejectionism. And until that takes place, we're going to be in the same situation with ceasefires. And basically, like Clausewitz says, politics being the interest means between two wars. In this case, it's the peace process leading to a war process until the Israelis know what they want to do vis-a-vis Gaza.
I mean, I have to provide the other side of the argument, sure, Greg, which was any certainly extensive military operation in Gaza is going to include a ground operation with heavy Israeli casualties, right, both on military and civilian as well, we have to presume. I mean, is that a price worth paying?
I think it is, because I think that the inevitability of another round of conflict will just show Hamas having even more strategic weaponry than they do right now. We saw the development of the Qassam rocket from a small Estes Model D rocket that can go more like a kilometer in 2000 when they started developing it, now to free fire with multiple salvos, able to overwhelm our anti-missile defense system with the Iron Dome with this round of conflict. What do we have to wait for Hamas to develop, which will create a strategic threat to Israeli infrastructure? Besides us seeing entire oil fields blowing up, the inability for the Ashkelon pipeline to deliver vital fuel to civilians in the Ashkelon ports, or even the closure of the entire country, until we make a decision saying, when is it going to be the time to end this, and are we willing to pay that cost? And that's a debate that we want the Israeli public to have, that the government is afraid to manage. You have to say, are you willing to have your soldiers, your boys and girls that are in the army, your 18 to 21-year-old conscripts, be with their life on the line? Or do we not want to make that decision and allow Gaza to develop into something, to metastasize into a point where they'll be on the lifeline anyway? And I think that discussion has to happen now rather than in a fifth round of conflict.
All right, Greg Roman of the Middle East Forum and the Israel Victory Project Now. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
On I-24 News.